Welcome to my Season 1 review of the Wheel of Time TV series that has just finished airing on Amazon Prime about a week ago. This review will be divided into multiple videos because my computer barely has the power to run Microsoft Word, much less my video editing software. I also won't be able to include many visuals from the show because my YouTube channel doesn't have enough weight not to be flagged for copyright issues. If you want to help me with that, please like and subscribe. I am very close to 1,000 subscribers and that will help tremendously. In this video, I will be covering the following topics related to Season 1 of The Wheel of Time: its overall reception by the audience, the actors who are cast into the series, the challenges, the world, and the conflict. Those last two I will be lumping into one category, and I will mostly focus on the main conflicts that Season 1 should have delivered, although it is debatable whether they did so successfully. In part 2, I will cover the characters as well as the plot, more about the conflicts related to individual character motivations in the plot, and the major themes of the story. At least, that is the plan, so, we'll see how it goes. Alright, so let's talk about the reception. The Wheel of Time was a hotly anticipated fantasy TV show based on books that have been loved globally by fans for over 40 years, and unfortunately, the reception of the show has been divisive at best. Okay, let's try that again. On IMDb, the show is scoring around 73%. On Rotten Tomatoes, it's hitting around 82% by critics, which is actually fantastic, although it's only 54% by top critics. The show has dropped to around 70% though by audiences, at least at the time of this late December review. These numbers are largely successful for a fantasy TV show, at least, if you're trying to make an average fantasy TV show. But I used to be a social media analyst, and I can tell you that these ratings are deceiving. There has been a very competent PR campaign associated with the release of the Wheel of Time TV show. And, I respect that. They did a great job. But most of these reviews dropped at the debut of the show when only 3 episodes were available to the public, although I believe journalists and critics got through episode 6. Unfortunately, the end of the show did not land well. The last 2 episodes did not solve problems that apologists for the show, I am including myself in that group, were hoping for since the show's debut, and especially since episode 4 was so promising as a highlight of the series. And we're going to get into why this is problematic in just a few. After Season 1's atrocious finale, and I am going to call it atrocious, and you can watch my review of why it's so awful, people just aren't as excited about this show anymore. The show isn't universally terrible, at least that's not what most people feel, and that's not what I'm saying. I know a lot of people worked really hard to bring this production to life. I also know a lot of people who are mostly enjoying it, and maybe it will get better. But Season 1 is offensive because of what the show could have been if it stuck closer to the source material and spent its limited budget in different ways. It's not that the books are perfect either. They definitely aren't, and I'm not saying that the film should have been, or that the show, should have been a scene-to-scene adaptation of the books, but The Wheel of Time is one of the most entertaining and immersive fantasy worlds in existence, and the story is written better than what the showrunners replaced it with, and a more faithful adaptation, again, more faithful, not exactly faithful, would have been doable after I have now seen what the show actually went with. So, in this review, we're going to dig into what went wrong with Season 1, holding on to hope that maybe subsequent seasons will be better because the book's materials do get better in later books, and perhaps the showrunners trust that material more than they trusted the first book, at least for how it would land with audiences. At least that is my hope. This review will contain spoilers for Season 1 of the Wheel of Time TV show. So if you haven't watched the whole show, you may get a little bit spoiled in this review in terms of what happens. However, it will contain minimal spoilers for the books. I am, in particular, not really saying anything about the books in part 1 of this review. In part 2, when we talk about characters, I am going to spoil a little bit what the motivations and powers of the characters were in the books and could have been in season 1 of the TV show if the showrunners had made some different decisions. Also, as a reminder, I do not have sponsors, so this is going to be an honest review of the show just by a person who loves the series, who has actual professional experience writing, doing analysis, and also marketing and PR, which is why I can tell you that the PR campaign leading up to the series was very competently done. So, good job, Amazon, on promoting the show and making everyone excited for it, and largely in galvaning a positive review for the series before the whole thing is out. Now you just need to deliver on that promise, because season one has some problems.
All right, so now that I have my external microphone actually working, we will try the second segment of this video, which is about the actors. Now, there are some comments on IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes that ridicule wooden or melodramatic acting in the Wheel of Time TV show. But I don't think that this is true or not accurate to how we should interpret the acting within the show's context. I personally think that the actors have all been tremendous, with some truly outstanding performances from Rosamund Pike, no surprise there, as well as the actors that play Valda and Podden Fane especially. I mean, they were just viscerally evil, and I really loved everything that those actors did. I also really loved Daniel Henley. Although his Lan is different from the Lan that's portrayed in the books, he does it beautifully, and he really made me love this reinterpretation of the character to the point that I didn't mind that much that Lan is, a bit less of a stoic person than the book portrays him. I also really liked the actors from Edmund's Field, although we don't really get to see as much what they can do, especially the boys, because the series doesn't give them that many golden moments. We will hopefully see more from them in subsequent seasons, and I'll cover more about this when I do my video focusing on the characters. So, the problem with the acting isn't the actors. It's the writing. The script just doesn't give these actors much of anything to work with. The emotional scenes feel unearned, the motivations are absent or unclear, and the dialogue at times is really weak. I do want to encourage the actors, though. In my analysis of social media, the casting and the acting is a highlight for most people. We, the fans, the people watching the show, by and large, love this cast. Compliments to the actors and casting director have abounded. They are plentiful. Now, that's not universally true. There are some people who have criticized or object to the diversity in the cast, especially for the Emmonsfielders. And I only want to touch on this briefly, but first, it is a minority of viewers. Second, the largest objection associated with it is that the Wheel of Time has a lot of diversity in the world by default. It is a very progressive story, especially for the time that it was written, but Edmund's Field is supposed to be this isolated village with a homogeneous population. Everyone except Rand is described as dark of hair and eye, and although you can interpret that in a lot of different ways, it was jarring for some people to see a lot of mixed families and people from all different cultures and races congealing together within this supposedly isolated village that is weary of strangers. However, I am personally okay with the decision to make Edmund's Field more mixed. We don't spend that much time there, and I think it is possible to get that close-knit tribal culture right without worrying what people look like. Most importantly, the diverse cast brings in a diverse audience. I don't want the show to have to go 2, 3, 4 seasons before diverse characters have prominent roles in this story. So I think that what they've done to make it more inclusive from the get-go was appropriate for an adaptation that is going to have to mix things up anyway. That's my interpretation, and I think it's the way the majority of the audience is feeling about the casting and about the diversity of the cast. And the point is that the actors have been wonderful. Most people are thrilled with the way that they are portraying these characters, and although I think the writing has shortchanged certain actors and what they are able to show us, the boys in particular, overall, their performances have been laudable, and I think the visibility is going to be good for the careers of these actors. I think that this is true even if the Wheel of Time TV show degrades after season 1. Hopefully it's going to get better, but it is possible that it will degrade, but overall I think that there's going to be a positive net impact for everyone who is a part of the show from an acting capacity. Rosamund Pike's got some nice credits to her name already, but she's capable of more than she's been getting, and now that everyone is talking about her based on her appearance and portrayal of Moiraine, who is a complex character, I think that, her opportunities are going to go up, and I think that is especially true because she really carries every single scene that Moiraine is in. So, good job, Rosamund Pike. We love you as Moiraine. We love all the actors and all the roles that they are playing, and even though this is a TV show with a middling reception so far, the exposure has been massive, and that is for the whole cast. I did not know who most of these actors were before this show, and now I'm interested in all of their careers. I hope to see them in other things. So, there's good reason to believe that that reception will also improve with subsequent seasons. The material in later books is so great if the writers don't muck it up. Now, before I lambast some of the writing choices that were made by season 1 of the Wheel of Time TV show, I want to acknowledge that adapting the Wheel of Time for television is not an easy task. It's really hard. Writing in general is difficult. Writing a fantasy book is so difficult. Cramming a complex fantasy series into a canned, artificially narrow format for TV, that's hard. That is really, really stinking hard. Also, for some fans of the books, there was nothing, and I mean nothing, that the showrunners could have done that would have been met with anything but ridicule. There are people who have read these books dozens of times, who know every tiny nuance and would just be negative towards any changes that were made, even understanding all the challenges that were in front of the showrunners to adapt this successfully to screen. There are also people who have read these books dozens of times who think that the work is perfect as written, and it's not. There are also people who have read these books many times and yet still don't understand them, and there are people who just don't have the concept of how difficult it is to orchestrate a production of this magnitude. The fact that it got done and looks pretty good is a major achievement. So, overall the show is watchable. It has been watched by millions. It's good, but it's not great. It's not a failure, but it's not what it could have been. And I'm going to focus on where the writing was lacking for me, because production, editing, stunts, special effects, those are not things that I have any expertise in. I'm someone also who believes that writing can save an otherwise badly produced show, but amazing production cannot save a story that is poorly written, at least not for intelligent viewers who care about characters, who care about things logically making sense, and who care about messaging. So let's talk about the challenges. When I first heard that the Wheel of Time book series was going to be produced into a TV show, I automatically assumed they were not going to do the whole thing. There are 14 books, and they aren't small books, they are large books. So that was going to be a challenge. And on top of that, Amazon has this weird thing where they want all of their original content to only be 8 episodes per season. You cannot blame the showrunners for this. I don't know why it's such a sticking point for Amazon, but all of their originals seem to be following this format, and I don't think the showrunners have any power over this. Executives are giving them this format and telling them, make it work, be creative, and that's what they have to do. So 14 books, 8 episodes per season, and if you're lucky, 7 or 8 seasons to tell the whole story. That essentially means that you would have to try to fit 2 books, 4 episodes apiece per season. That's 2 Wheel of Time books for each season. Just try to imagine how you would tell The Shadow Rising, everything that happens in that amazing book, in 4 episodes. I think it is essential for viewers of the TV show to embrace that there are going to be changes to the story, and I mean significant changes. I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, well, there's a lot of bloat in the second half of the book series. If they just trim the fat, they should be able to tell a fairly close rendering of the story as written as a TV show. But there's not so much bloat that you could faithfully adapt the first, say, 5 or 6 books and then cram in the other 7 or 8 books into 2 seasons. You can't do that. You're going to have to make some cuts to the story. There's just no way around it. We're just going to have to get used to that being the case. There's also way too many characters, like thousands and thousands of characters. And when you start shelling out money for casting, for paying actors, for, transporting actors to location, to managing the screen time, to creating costumes and all of the rest, the number of characters really bloats the budget. So you should really expect that many of the characters, many characters from the Wheel of Time series are never going to make it to screen, and those that do may be killed off before their time to make room for other actors in the budget. It is not surprising that we did not get Elias in The Eye of the World, and really his appearance in The Eye of the World is a remarkable coincidence anyway. Perrin just happens to be in the same field with the only other wolf brother in the world who's sane. Yeah, I guess you could say it's because he's Taviran, but it's kind of a silly coincidence, and you don't really need him to explain Perrin's situation. In the show, at least, they could have given that role to Lan, who knew Elias because they're both warders. I don't know why the show didn't do that. Fritz. I don't know why the show didn't do that. There was plenty of time in Tarvalin for that conversation to have happened, but I digress. The point is that Elias is not an essential character. He's therefore not worth casting, especially because he blips out of existence after the first book and doesn't show up again until the last book, where he still does very little. So, not surprising that Elias is not in the show's version of the Wheel of Time, and you should be prepared for worse omissions than Elias. I suspect that we may not get Queen Morghese in the story at all, other than Elaine mentioning her by letter. I wouldn't be surprised if Leandrin is merged with Elida. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't get to see a lot of characters that are in the books that they're just not going to make it, because there has to be changes. That's honestly understandable. It's okay. It's necessary. I don't object to it, even if it's a little bit hard to take if your, favorite characters don't make it into the script. Nevertheless, I understand why that needs to be done. I just want the story to be good. I want the writing to make sense. The plot events can be scrambled every which way, but I want every season to give me a satisfying arc of a story and moments for the characters that make me smile. And that is something that season 1 could have done better. We'll get into that in a moment. I want to touch on a couple other challenges that the showrunners had to face that was not their fault. So, COVID-19 hit when this TV series was still filming. My understanding is that episodes 7 and 8 were the most impacted by COVID-19. Hold on. Hey. have to grab the cat because he was doing bad things and interrupting my filming. So we're going to hold on to him for just a little bit until he calms down. Episodes 7 and 8 were reputedly the most impacted by COVID. From what I've heard, they lost access to some of their filming locations, including where they were planning to film The Blight. I believe that is why the forest that we were given for The Blight looks kind of like something that was built for a stage play, and I think that they had to come up with that. And a last-minute scramble, and I'm not mad at it anymore, you guys. they pulled it off. So I'm going to walk back my criticism of the stage set for The Blight, and I'm going to instead applaud the stage designers who, probably had craftspeople and digital artists working all-nighters to make a forest for our actors to perform in. And under those circumstances, I think they did a great job. So, good enough. You made it work. We got a Blight for the finale of episode 8. I also think that we can blame COVID, at least in part, for some of the lackluster battle mechanics that happened at the end of the season. I think there was a lot of last-minute rewriting because they probably intended to have a lot more extras available to them to play Trollocs in costume, as well as Shinarans, orchestrating that fight on a battlefield as opposed to the way they ended up doing it. So they probably had to, figure out how can we show a battle scene with only a couple of actors at our disposal, and then they added in some hasty CGI work to fill in the gaps. And, it doesn't look great. It's not very convincing, but at least they pulled off something, and the pandemic was not their fault. So I'm going to go ahead and give that a pass too, after some reflection and some research on the impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic had on the production process. They also lost Barney Harris, who plays Matt Cawthon in season 1. No one knows, or at least I haven't heard anyone who with any, knowledge close to the subject, what happened to Barney Harris, if it's related to COVID or something unrelated to COVID. And the fact that the actors and the producers and everyone involved in the telling of this story as a TV show has been so tight-lipped about it tells me that it's none of my business. So he's not on the show, and I hope that he's okay. I'd love to see him in something else. I think we all really enjoyed his performance for the 6 episodes that we got, but certainly his departure from the show would have created some problems for the showrunners, and we can't really fault them for doing the adjustments that they needed to do to finish the season 1 story that they had in mind. There is speculation that it was supposed to be Matt facing off against Padan Fain instead of Perrin in that last episode. I don't know if that is true. Maybe it was both of them together. Maybe it was just supposed to be Matt, but certainly that his departure would have impacted the script for that last episode. Rewrites were certainly necessary, and I don't know how quickly those had to be done and then dashed off without a lot of review time. So, it's hard to judge. It's hard to know, but that's okay. We can cut them some slack for the writing on that last couple of episodes, just due to the impact of COVID and due to Barney Harris leaving the show. Some slack. The last thing I want to mention is that there is a challenge with this show trying to live up to Game of Thrones while also differentiating itself from The Lord of the Rings. And I do think that they may have fumbled this to some degree. I don't think that the Wheel of Time should be trying to be Game of Thrones. A lot of fantasy fans, frankly, don't like Game of Thrones because it's too brutal. It's full of violence, it's full of sex, including incest and rape and other forms of abuse, and it's just hard to watch for some people and, overly gratuitous. So I actually think that the Wheel of Time had the potential to be an absorbing fantasy series like Game of Thrones, but that is family friendly. And by family friendly, I don't mean that they should have cut out LGBTQ references or characters, but they could have focused more on heroism and less on characters' relationships, especially their sexual relationships with each other. I have heard some people describe The Wheel of Time as YA because it's not very risque, but I don't personally think the books are YA meaning young adult, if you're not familiar with the term. They are more accessible to younger readers, yes, but the concepts are more complex than what I typically associate with YA. And I think replicating that for television, focusing on the more complex concepts and the immersion of the fantasy world, would have been smart. I think their audience could have potentially been huge. And I know that grimdark has been, in vogue now, but that's just because the story in Game of Thrones was compelling enough to start a fad. There's also been fads around vampires and the paranormal because of Twilight. There have been fads around teenage dystopia because of the Hunger Games. You don't create a fad by copying what someone else was doing. And the Wheel of Time was original enough that it could have created its own fad. And it's just one person's opinion. Hopefully it's not too late for that, but it is a little bit too late to be as family friendly as I was hoping for, at least in the first season. If anything, it's going to be less family friendly in the future, and I guess that's just the choice that the showrunners made. As for The Lord of the Rings, the show had the opposite problem there. They want to be like Game of Thrones. They want to distance themselves from The Lord of the Rings. Not because The Lord of the Rings is bad by any means. Obviously, Amazon is spending a lot of money to create a whole new story set in the Lord of the Rings world. The problem is the first book of The Wheel of Time, and really only the first book, feels too similar to The Lord of the Rings, especially in how it begins. And this is because in the time that it was written, every fantasy needed to copy The Lord of the Rings in order to get published. Non-creative people who run businesses want to cash in on fads rather than create their own fads, and that's just what the fad was at the time. So is it myopic? Yes, but it was also a thing. So anyway, The Eye of the World book starts off way too similar to The Lord of the Rings, and they could have made this worse in the show. Like, just imagine if they had shown Matt excited about fireworks and everyone watching this show just said, oh, look, it's Pippin. So that might have been one of the reasons why they changed his character, although I'll get into some of the negatives of that in part 2 of this review. They also could have made a bigger deal out of the Dark Rider that Rand sees but doesn't interact with him, which would, also have been too much like the Nazgul in The Lord of the Rings. I actually wish that they had leaned in more to the things that make Emond's Field different from the Shire in The Lord of the Rings. I wish we had seen less of the inside of common rooms in medieval inns and more focus on the Beltane activities like archery and quarterstaff competitions. That would have been a great opportunity to give some skills to our characters, especially the boy characters, who could then have used those skills later in the season in ways that would have been fun and exciting and built up their, potential as heroes later in the story. But, I'll get more into that when we talk about characters in part 2 of this review. Let's talk a little bit about one other challenge of producing this big of a show, and that is the world and its conflicts. Where are you going? I am lumping these two together because, well, you'll understand why in a minute. World building is critical to any fantasy series. Most people who read fantasies do it because of the immersion of the world, the interest in the magic systems, the level of heroism that is possible when you have fantastical elements at play. And The Wheel of Time is no exception to that. It is such a large, immersive and magic-filled world. There are so many concepts to cover. The wheel and the concept of reincarnation. We have the pattern. We have the one power, the dark one, the dragon, the breaking of the world, the taint on Saidine, the Eye of the World being a clean pool of Saidine again in the books, Aes Sedai as a concept, the warders and their bonds, the prophecy of the dragon reborn, false dragons, the seals of the Dark One's prison, shadow spawn, the last battle, the White Tower in Tar Valon, the Ajas, the Ogier, the Waygates, the darkness of the ways and the creation of Ma Shen-Jin, the Shadow Logoth and the curse of the dagger, Mordeth, White Cloaks. I'm like barely scratching the surface. There are so many concepts in The Wheel of Time. I get why the showrunners would say, you know what, We only have 8 episodes in this first season. We cannot cover everything. We are going to minimize the number of concepts that are introduced and just hammer down on the ones that are relevant for season 1. In theory, I like that concept. However, I think they chose some of the wrong concepts to focus on. So, ideally, the world of the Wheel of Time should be revealed alongside the main conflicts that make immersion in that world interesting. People remember what is emotionally important to understanding the story. They don't really notice or remember little world building blocks that are dropped in the background or included as part of exposition that is irrelevant to the stakes in a particular scene that is currently at play. For example, nobody watching the show that has not read the books had any takeaway whatsoever for what those little statues that signified the Forsaken were supposed to mean. Because that whole scene, that whole episode, was about Steppen's grief and the Warder bond and Lan and Steppen bonding over, their various tribulations. No one has commented in any reaction video that I have seen of, oh, I wonder if those little statuette figures are important. They don't even know what they are. So that is an example of how to not do world building in a TV show. Really, season 1 should have focused on the main concepts that directly explain the conflict of the story in its first opening arc. That means, what is the Wheel of Time and the pattern? They did that, to a better or less degree. People got the concept of reincarnation. They included all of, the lanterns and Tam talking to Rand about his mother being reborn, in some future spinning of the wheel. So that was kind of explained in a okay fashion, although I don't think the pattern really has been mentioned at all. Maybe they will weave it in. More important, though, is the dragon and the dragon reborn and what those two concepts mean. And they did an abysmal job of explaining the dragon and the dragon reborn. And I have to pause and go back and watch the whole series to see all of the ways that they contradicted themselves when it comes to who or what is the dragon, what Moiraine knows or doesn't know about it, what she tells all of the characters who have a stake in understanding that particular, piece of lore and how it matters to them. It just felt so clumsily done. And I honestly, it's not even because they didn't include the prologue. Yes, the prologue would have been helpful to understanding that, but even just getting the lore right and explaining who is who and what is what would have gone a long way in making the concept of the dragon and the dragon reborn in order to fight the last battle more tenable to an audience that has no idea what these things are. And instead they made a whole bunch of decisions to try to do something thematic with the female characters having more to do than the male characters in the story, which I'm also going to cover separately because I think that's more part of the themes of the story, and I do think they got some things wrong there as well. But my biggest issue here is that the role the dragon plays in this story is not that clear, and that should have been the one thing that they really tried to establish in season 1 of the show. They also need to explain the one power, and that there are 2 halves of the one power, a female half and a male half, in which the male half is tainted. They don't do this, and although it's in some of those animated shorts that you can watch externally from the show seems to contradict itself even on how that works. Why the men are tainted is not understood. How Moiraine can use the same Sa'angreal that Rand uses in the story is not understood. They aren't explaining it. So either the one power is the same for all of the characters and just the women are not touched by the taint, or it's just very, very poorly produced and under-explained, and it upsets me. The other thing that they don't do very well is explain the prophecy of the dragon will be reborn to fight the Dark One in something that is called the Last Battle. That should have been explained, and the Borderlands was a great place to explain that, and they didn't. Instead, they made it more convoluted by saying the Tarwin's Gap was the last battle or the beginning of the last battle, and it wasn't. It was also easily overcome by 5 untrained female channelers, like easily overcome to the point where I would think people watching the show will go, well, that was easy. If like 5 untrained women can do as much as they did, even though a couple of them got burned out from the process, then the real last battle must be no problem, because there's a whole White Tower full of Aes Sedai who weren't even brought to bear in this conflict, and also the dragon wasn't needed to do this at all, didn't even show up to the party to help anyone with this, so unimportant, I guess. And that was the takeaway of the season finale of The Wheel of Time, and just, wow, what a missed opportunity. They're really going to have to do some backpedaling in season 2 to explain why this understanding of the characters is so wrong. And again, I don't hate that as a concept. Misinformation is one of the themes that is an intrinsic part of the Wheel of Time story, but when you're doing a TV production of something where the focus has to be on really getting across the concept of the main story and getting us to like the characters, adding in a whole bunch of misinformation at the beginning of the story is a really bad way to get your audience to become invested in what's going on. Everyone's just going to feel lied to, or that the show doesn't understand the story, or that the characters are stupid. And this is very problematic storytelling for many, many reasons, which I will cover further in a part 2 of this video. So, in other words, the whole season 1 should have been about understanding who is the Dragon Reborn and why does he, I'm going to emphasize he, although I will get into that later, will either save or destroy the world based on the inevitability that all male channelers will go mad. Everything else is secondary to this conflict, and I mean, people don't understand this. I have watched reaction videos, and there are still people who just kind of assume, because story logic, that the Dragon Reborn will be an exception to the rule that all male channelers go mad. They did not adequately cover that because, again, the taint on Saidin is not well explained. It kind of seems like individual men are being targeted by the taint or by the Dark One, and maybe the dragon will just not be targeted by that same taint, because it's not explained that they are tapping into something that has been corrupted, and there's no way that anyone in the world knows to uncorrupt it. That has to be explained, and it hasn't been. It's so frustrating. And even the book doesn't cover all of this. Most of the Eye of the World is about Rand learning or realizing that he can channel. So if you wanted to scale back the number of concepts you're covering in season 1 even further, you can start just with that. Make that really, really clear. Instead, season 1 decided to put a lot of emphasis on explaining intricacies of the Aes Sedai, the Warder Bond, the White Tower politics, Moraine's background, and in my opinion, they did this badly, and they did it in a way that was irrelevant to what actually happens in this first season. I have heard it stated that they wanted to get into later aspects of the story, and that the politics of books 4 through 6 are what made those books so good. I profoundly disagree. Politics is not what makes books 4 through 6 the best books in the series. I don't know if I can explain this simply without, charting the whole series and getting into a lot of spoilers, which I promised I would not do, but I will try. If politics were what made books 4 through 6 so good, then Savannah is probably everyone's favorite character, right? Is Savannah your favorite character? If you've read the books and you had to pause to try to remember who is Savannah, that is my point exactly. Savannah is the wife of the clan chief of the Shido Aiel. The one who politics her way into power and sort of secretly is the lead antagonist of books 4 through 6. Is she your favorite character? Are stopping the Shido Aiel your favorite conflict in the Wheel of Time? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe I am wrong, and that is your favorite part of the story. I know that the Battle of Cairhien is really exciting. But that's not what I'm talking about. I don't want to spoil the books for people, so I'll just say this. It's not the politics that make that conflict so interesting. It's the winning that happens in those books. It's the enlargement of the world, the heroism, the higher stakes. Rand wins the most in books 4 through 6. He has a huge growth arc in those books. He is on a roll, and Egwene, Elaine, and Nynaeve also have some very big wins in those books. So again, I don't want to spoil things, and maybe I'll dive deeper into it later, but seriously, it's not the politics. Yes, the maneuvering of many enemies for their own selfish reasons at the cost of potentially everything was adding to the conflict in those books, but it's conquering enemies and the strong wins for the good guys in spite of the politics that makes those books so compelling and so fun to read and reread many times. And you cannot rush that. You need the stakes first, and that is what season 1 should have laid the foundation for, but it doesn't give us this. Season 1 should be about making us like the characters and giving us clear stakes about what this story is about. And let me tell you, it is not about Rand not marrying Egwene because she wants to be Wisdom or Aes Sedai or whatever. That is not the main conflict of the Wheel of Time. Instead, the actual conflicts are not explained. And it doesn't give us any wins, no major wins for any of the characters except Nynaeve, and that part was not even in the book. So, although I like that a lot because it gave me some of that feeling that the Wheel of Time gives you as a very complicated story with tons of heroic moments, the politics and, it doesn't work. The story is changed by the showrunners to bring in these elements that are not interesting, and it doesn't make a better story. The politics that we see in the White Tower is supposed to be 3D chess between people who have been playing against each other for decades or even centuries, and instead it comes off more like high school checkers. And I don't know, go watch my review episode 6 if you want more details on that, but it just did not add the level of gravitas I think the showrunners were expecting it to do, and maybe it's because they don't understand what's so compelling about these stories. I don't know. I don't understand why they did that. Maybe the plotting of future seasons will make it more clear, we can hope, but what matters for now is that the impact that diverting so much attention to water bonds and Aes Sedai politics, or even Aes Sedai at all, in season 1 just didn't really have a payoff. There wasn't much interesting that happened at the end of the season as a result of spending time on that in the middle. And yes, I do understand that Moiraine was stilled at the end of the season, or maybe shielded and tied off, it's unclear, but I don't care for that decision. It wasn't really impactful because I don't believe that Moiraine is really stilled any more than I believed that Yennefer lost her magic in season 2 of The Witcher. It is cheap writing that comes off as just a way for TV scriptwriters to give this character something to do in season 2 when there wasn't much content for that character in the books. Same problem, same solution, same hackneyed, tired, uninspiring, uncreative solution. I did not care for it. So, because Rosamund Pike is such a highly billed actress, they need to create some conflict for Moiraine to try to resolve in season 2 of The Wheel of Time. So I assume that she will get healed somehow. And the problem with that is it's going to take all of the bite out of stilling as a consequence for channelers. That used to be something that, made you nervous as a reader of the books. And man, season 1 really negated all of the serious consequences that could befall our characters. Serious injuries, easily healed. Stilling, probably going to be easily healed. Burning out, easily healed. Potentially even death was easily healed. You got Loyal stabbed, I don't think he is dead. And Nynaeve, if she was burned out, was healed. And if she's dead, she was healed. Again, easily by these half-trained or really untrained characters. So, there's nothing that the female characters in this story can't do, and the male characters get no shining moments at all that isn't in service of the female characters. Even Rand's big moment, which should have been saving everyone at Tarwin's Gap, was given to a character that we just met, Amalisa, who then promptly dies. And Rand also didn't even really defeat the Dark One because of noble, heroic reasons. He defeated the Dark One so that Egwene could retain her free will to go on to become Aes Sedai or Wisdom and not marry him. And I just... wow. Like, those were not good changes. They don't make a better story. I'm not opposed to having, the female characters shine in the Wheel of Time. They do in the books, and they should in this as well. But giving all of the strong moments for the male characters to the female characters for no reason doesn't make for a great show. It doesn't make me want to watch the next season because it feels so unbalanced and uninteresting, frankly. There are just no stakes. The Dragon Reborn wasn't needed to fight the last battle, or what the characters thought was the last battle at the end of season 1. The only reason he's able to defeat the Dark One is because of his feelings for Egwene, and it's bad. It's bad. The biggest problem with season 1 of The Wheel of Time is that it has bad writing. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry to say it, but it's true. The writing is just not up to par. The showrunners are not able to write a better story than Robert Jordan wrote. And although I recognize that the story has to be seriously truncated, entire plot elements removed or re-scrambled in new ways, they just don't seem to understand the essential conflicts of the story, the essential motivations of the characters well enough to re-scramble it in a way that makes sense. Instead, we're getting some kind of, reinterpretation of the Wheel of Time altogether, and it's disappointing. It's just disappointing. So I have more to say, so much more to say, but, I wrote 4,000 words on this topic so far, and we were getting past the point where my computer is able to render a video into one piece, so I'm going to have to pause it here. And in part 2, we will take a closer look at the characters, their personalities, motivations, abilities, and arcs that should have been given to us in this first season, if not the first couple of seasons. We'll also take a look at the plot and how else the TV show managed to muck up the important conflicts between what the characters' motivation should be and what they actually end up doing in the show. And we'll take a look at how the TV show managed to undermine its own internal logic in ways that just make the stakes of the story either incomprehensible or so weak as to not compel viewers to want to tune in to the next episode or tune in next season, which should be all that this story is trying to do. So anyway, let me know what you think of part 1 of this review, and please like and subscribe because I am close to 1,000 subscribers, and I am hoping that when I get there, it might open some doors for me in terms of how I produce these videos and what types of content I can include in order to make these reviews a more satisfying experience. So until next time.